truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, June 3rd, 2024, the 1,230th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. With a paid subscription, you get the ad-free experience. You can participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be able to participate in the weekly interactive live streams every Wednesday afternoon. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right. So on Friday, we talked about the response to the Trump guilty verdict, guilty of felonies on all 34 counts. The court won 34-0, undefeated over Donald Trump's felonies. Judge Merchan just one of the best judges ever, according to an obviously gay now Andrew Weissman. Maybe he was always gay. It's cool. But he was basically swooning on national television, talking about his man crush on Judge Juan Merchan. We'll talk about my emphasis on Juan later. Rachel Maddow loves him. Everything was totally above board. One thing we have to make sure is that no one is allowed to doubt the legitimacy of this decision. No one is allowed to doubt the legitimacy of our judicial system. In fact, this decision is irreducible. In Rachel Maddow's telling, it is unassailable. And sure, there are numerous grounds for appeal, but Trump making use of that aspect of our legal system will actually be Trump showing off once again his disrespect for the rule of law, because they have already determined that this decision is irreducible. It cannot be questioned. If you question this decision, you are threatening to destroy our democracy in the same way that you were when you were questioning whether or not Joe Biden received 81 million votes. And no one knows that Joe Biden is more legitimate as a president than Joe Biden, of course. He's made it a point throughout his fake presidency to remind the people of this nation that no one is above the law. He tweeted it out again on Friday. And that means a lot from a person who has been involved with political crime and corruption for 5 decades. In fact, his son is in court this week to be found not guilty of crimes for which there is overwhelming evidence and are not made up crimes, thus apparently proving that no one is above the law. Maybe they're right. Maybe we just need to move to the understanding that the law simply does not apply to an entire class of people, at least until and unless they stop supporting the global regime and its agenda. Biden wants you to know that when the courts find Trump guilty, the courts are legitimate. And he wants you to remember that when they find him not guilty. And in a few weeks from now, when the Supreme Court starts releasing their decisions that might end up hampering the implementation of that global regime agenda, those decisions will be illegitimate because of Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. Therefore, Joe Biden and his allies will be justified in basically overthrowing the Supreme Court. It's a conspiracy theory if you think it'll be bad that they do that. But if you think it's good that they're doing that, they will be glad to take credit for the fact that they definitely are doing that for that reason, and you can then hold them up as heroes. No one is above the law, you see, just some people are outside it. Our election systems, of course, work the same way, and that's why you should never be questioning them. Joe Biden, from his Joe Biden, not his POTUS account on X, formerly Twitter, posted on Friday. Donald Trump is threatening our democracy. First, he questioned our election system. Then he questioned our judicial system. And now you can stop him. And there is a link to donate your money to Joe Biden. There is a picture of Donald Trump in black and white looking to the left, and it says, "Save democracy, stop Trump." The message there seems to be, no matter how wealthy you are, no matter how powerful you are, if you question the legitimacy of this government, we will destroy your reputation, confiscate all of your wealth, and lock you away forever. It's just like the science. Not being allowed to question it is the best case anyone can make that it's working. I mean, if we didn't all know that it was working perfectly, then we wouldn't all be saying it, right? We are not all just doing as we're told. We're not all just repeating the slogans. We are not all just lying to one another in correspondence with an incentive and punishment structure that governs virtually all of our behavior. We all know that we all know the same thing, and that thing is proven. If it wasn't proven, we wouldn't all be saying it. And certainly other people like us must have checked, and they know that we must have checked. Therefore, none of us actually need to check because everybody else did. We'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and everyone will know There's no way we could all be lying. Therefore, we're not all lying. And because we're saying the same thing, that means we're all telling the truth because we can't all be lying. And it can't be that we just don't know because the experts agree with us too. So I want to build a bit on what we discussed on Friday. And by the way, I want to say that when I was recording my show on Friday, I was a little bit concerned. I wanted to be careful with my language because I was worried that people were going to be upset by the verdict. I know when these things happen, it immediately sparks this massive wave of messages from the commies in your life. They pile on. They try to make you feel bad. They try to silence you. They try to make you feel like they finally won. They feel very powerful that they can send a president to prison. You're a cult member, you see, and if they take away your cult leader, well, you're going to be destroyed. And I do find it strange that people are still in touch with that sort of communist after all these years. I don't know why any of you do that to yourselves, particularly if they're not your spouse or your family member. But maybe you're just gluttons for punishment. Maybe you want to keep people close to you who will happily turn you into the Gestapo. If things go sour, I don't understand the advantage to that. Maybe I'm just crazy. But from the response on Friday and then over the weekend, it seems people are pretty mellow about all this. So give yourself a little pat on the back, a little round of applause, whatever you might do to celebrate. Congratulations on not freaking out and not giving these child brains exactly what they want. But on Friday, we discussed the response from the Uniparty left first and foremost. They wanted to make sure that everyone agrees this decision was legitimate. Our courts are legitimate. Everything is operating the way it's supposed to operate. Trump committed a crime, in fact, 34 of them. A local DA was able to conceive of a novel legal theory where he could package a few non-felonies together, make them a felony, claiming that a supposed misdemeanor outside the statute of limitations was performed to cover up a federal election crime that the federal officials did not believe to be a crime. And then he could bring that case and the former president in front of a man who's been an acting judge for 15 years and find a jury to convict the former president. And now he's a convicted felon. The judge's daughter receives mountains of cash from Democrats, but the judge does not have to recuse. Maybe he would have if his wife had hung a flag upside down outside their house or something, indicating a genuine conflict of interest. But his daughter receiving mountains of cash from Democrats is no big deal. Everything was totally above board. Our courts are still legitimate. In fact, they're so legitimate that the Uniparty right wants to take the same model and turn it right back around against Democrats, because that's what all of this is about. Republicans versus Democrats, Democrats versus Republicans. It's not MAGA versus the Uniparty. It's the Uniparty right versus the Uniparty left. And all of us, well, we just have to line up behind one of those sides. The Uniparty right is prepared to lament that our legal system is now used this way. But if it's going to be used this way, we can't question its legitimacy. What we have to do is agree that it can be used this way and use it ourselves. That's what it means to be fighters. Megyn Kelly let everyone know that Democrats will rue the day that they decided to use lawfare to affect a political outcome. Matt Walsh in the Daily Wire bros suggested that attorneys general and district attorneys around the country find some Democrats to go and prosecute. Megyn Kelly listed Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton as potential targets. And we're all supposed to be like, yeah, go get them, Republican establishment district attorneys and attorneys general who were quote unquote elected in elections no one can verify. Oh, that'll save the country. This is the war cry of the Uniparty right. They've figured out a way to make themselves look powerful again. They've once again stepped forward and said, choose me as your champion. I'm going to take it to those Democrats. I ended the show with this on Friday, but it's a short clip, and I just want to refresh everyone's memory. Steve Bannon put it very succinctly on Friday morning.
A lot of this is information warfare. A lot of this is psyops, and a lot of it is to regenerate the strength of the controlled opposition.
Regenerate the strength of the controlled opposition. The Uniparty right wants you to know, hey, we're all in this together. Sure, they're upset about what's happened to the country. They're upset that things have reached this point. But if they can get you repeating their slogans about how they're prepared to save us now, you might forget about the fact that they covered up the usurpation of this country in alliance not with America First, not with Donald Trump, not with MAGA, but with their controlled opposition on the Uniparty left. Now, in the eyes of the standard issue villager out there who still loves to watch the television and believes that everything on TV has to be true, they wouldn't be allowed to tell it to you otherwise. The Republican Party has declared war on the Democrats using lawfare. We talked about Donald Trump's massive haul on Friday, campaign donations totaling nearly $35 million. It went up 50% at least beyond that over the weekend. It's well above 50 million now. But it's not only Donald Trump. Republicans are making a lot of money on Donald Trump being convicted too. Why would that be the case? Isn't it odd that something terrible happens to Donald Trump and the Uniparty right is the beneficiary of that? Trump wondered aloud where the Uniparty left was getting all of its donation money, all of these big numbers that they were bringing in. Where is the Uniparty right getting their money? Are we really supposed to believe there are a bunch of Republicans out there choosing to donate to the National Party, Republicans in the Senate and in the Congress, and not Donald Trump instead? You have to wonder if they're pulling money in from the same globalists. But in the eyes of the standard issue villager, war has been declared by the Uniparty right on the Uniparty left. And from their perspective, MAGA, America First, we are like the dangerous extremist version of the Uniparty right. We are an extension of them. We're not in opposition to them. They are our allies, as they tell us, of course. And in the eyes of standard issue villagers, we are actually following them when we are not following Trump. So if they've declared war, we've declared war. Megyn Kelly said we might go after Biden and Obama and Hillary. And it wouldn't be over a bookkeeper calling a legal expense a legal expense. It would be for crimes against America and crimes against humanity. It would be for treason. Laura Loomer was a guest on the Standard Issue Villager Hour hosted by Tim Pool. And when she brought up treason and the punishment for treason, Tim Pool took the show down off the air because he didn't want YouTube to cancel him. That's how you keep your platform for all these years in the age of censorship from an oppressive communist regime. If they'll silence you for saying certain things, well, the mature response is to silence yourself. I talked about this a bit over the weekend on Devolution Power Hour. You have to make them actually follow through with their punishment. Tim Pool has plenty of money. He can move to other platforms and have his audience sign up and pay him a monthly fee rather than relying on YouTube advertising. But nope, you got to keep that gravy train rolling. Or hey, maybe it's all a show. Maybe it's just the info op and they wanted the headline of Tim Pool bringing the show down. I don't know how or why that's a better headline than YouTube censors the Standard Issue Villager Hour hosted by Tim Pool. But what do I know? I'm not the one in charge. Now, the show continued on other platforms. You can still find it. He knows there's nothing wrong with having that conversation. There's just something wrong with it on YouTube. And when you get paid $1 million a week to comply, well, you're gonna comply. And what speech code is he complying with here? Obviously a false one. The conflation of the death penalty for treason with violence by individuals. The suggestion that those who have committed treason and who are prosecuted and found guilty should receive the death penalty is reframed as people advocating vigilantism, street violence, and lawlessness. So the Uniparty left says that our court system, our legal system is legitimate. The same way you trust the science, the same way our elections are legitimate, our court system is legitimate. The Uniparty right, their controlled opposition, they agree the system is legitimate. But you know what? We declare war now. You have abused the system, so we're going to abuse the system right back at you. And because the crimes we're accusing you of come with the penalty of death, then it's violence. And if you've declared war, including violence against the people in the other political party, well, that sounds an awful lot like civil war. And everybody knows that the Civil War was fought over race. So now we're going to have a race war. And we're even going to be willing to elect a convicted felon to lead us in a race war. That is what is being argued right now. And our controlled opposition is supporting that very mainstream framing. Now, how long have we been talking about them getting to that point? We've been discussing all this as the framing of a run-up to a civil war for years now. And I know that sounds a bit frightening, but you have to remember that all of these people are truly incompetent and they are not able to effectively convince everyone anymore that they're actually correct. They want to produce the image of a nation divided at one another's throats. And they want to blame that on the extremists on both sides, Antifa and the pro-Hamas protesters on one side, and those awful MAGA extremists on the other side. The Uniparty left and the Uniparty right, you see, they're the responsible representatives of both of those sides. Sure, they're willing to sue each other into oblivion, but that's just them using the legitimate processes of our judicial system. That's not where the real civil war is. That's among the lowly masses. If they can preserve the controlled opposition dynamic, Democrats versus Republicans, Uniparty left versus Uniparty right, and no one reaches the understanding that it is America first, it is MAGA, it is the American people against the Uniparty, then they will be able to effectively rerun all of their historical narratives. The Civil War, World War I, and World War II, they're using elements of all of those to shape the public understanding about what's happening in America right now. They are previewing it in every possible way. It's just a matter of whether or not they'll be able to sell these ideas, and that comes down to whether or not they have control over the means of information. We talked earlier about the repetition of their slogans, and Alex Soros, the Soros scion, stated it explicitly on Friday on X, formerly Twitter. He said, Democrats should refer to Trump as a convicted felon at every opportunity. Repetition is the key to a successful message, and we want people to wrestle with the notion of hiring a convicted felon for the most important job in the country. Now, let's just briefly acknowledge the fact that these are the people who want convicted felons released from prison so they can vote. These are the people who put convicted felons in positions of prominence and power within communities and within governments, happy to sing their praises for turning their lives around. And truth be told, if someone's a convicted felon and they serve their time, it is, of course, a good and honorable thing for them to rejoin the world and turn their lives around. That's good. But leaving that aside, Soros included a screenshot of a New York Times cover that says Trump guilty on all counts. The strategy is to refer to Trump as a convicted felon at every opportunity. He says repetition is the key to a successful message. He wants to hammer it into people's heads. That provides the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum. It gives standard issue villagers on the Uniparty right the perfect excuse when they're explaining to their fellow wannabe elites why they just can't bring themselves to support Donald Trump. Oh, you see, I'm not the kind of person who could ever support a convicted felon. It creates the opportunity for people to shame Trump supporters. You have no moral authority. You're supporting a convicted felon for the most important job in America. And they'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. They've been leading up to this for a very long time. I've talked at length many times. I have written. You can find it on Substack. It's called The Sides of History. They are writing through the production of this fake news and these fake narratives, a false history for the future, so that people 50 years from now will look back on the record that has been kept of this era, and it will be their narrative that continues on. That is the plan. That is how it has always worked in the past. This is what you're able to do when you have the power and the control, particularly over the means of information. You rewrite the past, You present a falsified version of the present, and you use all of that to create a story about the future that people will understand to be good and necessary, and then work to live their lives in correspondence with that emerging future. The repetition of these slogans, therefore, in some sense, makes their version real, because it will be the real history to people in the future who don't know any better, assuming their side wins and writes the history. For instance, Alex Soros' father, George Soros, admits to being a Nazi collaborator, simply saying that it was what he had to do in order to survive.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there. None of that.
Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. And it was whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator, the property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. So I had no sense of guilt.
Are you religious?
No.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Now, leaving aside the distortions of history present in that clip, we can understand that George Soros and his son prioritize their worldview and the agenda that springs forward from that above any sort of moral commitment, because they are moral relativists, if they have any morality at all. But again, Alex Soros is being specific here. It is the repetition of the message that he deems critical. He wants Donald Trump to be diminished in every possible way, to the greatest extent possible, through the repetition of the message convicted felon. So that when Donald Trump enters office as the winner of the 2024 election, and they have thoroughly stolen all the down ballot races, elections top to bottom across the country, everything from your state elections to your city councils and local school boards, Donald Trump would have the least possible power to accomplish anything while in office. That seems to be their best case scenario. That seems to be what they're striving for. Of course, I don't think they will achieve this, but if we are able to determine their strategy, then it's easier to understand in that context what exactly all their little moves mean. They want to diminish Trump as possible. They're going to use the repetition of the phrase convicted felon in order to do that. Now, there's a very famous man who has talked about this strategy before, and it's totally possible that Alex Soros' father may have known this man. And if not, certainly they are friends of friends. I'm talking about Joseph Goebbels, the man to whom the concept of the big lie has been attributed. And in Goebbels' framing, this is the quote attributed to Goebbels. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Now, naturally, the media projection to us is what constructs that layer of the false reality on top of reality prime. It is constantly occupied with projecting a total inversion within the false reality, which is why Donald Trump and his supporters were said to be telling the big lie when questioning the legitimacy of Joe Biden's 81 million supposedly real, lawful American votes. But as we discussed at the time and on many occasions since, that is a nonsensical framing. We didn't have the power of the state to suppress dissent. We did not have control over the means of information. So even if the repetition of some falsehood was our strategy, there's no way it could have worked. The position held by those in power and held by those with control over the means of information was that our elections were free and fair, safe and secure, and that the reported results accurately reflected the will and intent of the American voter. Alex Soros is advocating for the big lie strategy. And a standard issue villager might say, but that's not a big lie. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. Well, okay, commie. I guess you're allowed to say that and pretend it's true for a few months if you're first willing to lie about the legitimacy of those charges and the trial and the verdict. Okay, I guess you can pretend you're honest for a few months or so when claiming that Donald Trump is a convicted felon. But all of that was done in service of this narrative. They wanted to be able to say that Donald Trump is a criminal, so they figured out a way to make him a criminal. They've been working on that for 9 years now. Even the issues at hand in this fake trial were 7 and 8 years old. The framing of Donald Trump as a convicted felon is not the natural outcome to a series of events in the real world. It was the goal the entire time for which that series of events was brought into being. But the regime communists were not done with this new rerun of the big lie narrative. This is Jamie Raskin, Friar Cuck himself, in the congressional hearing with Anthony Fauci today.
People who brought you the political big lie, claiming absurdly that Trump won the 2020 election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes, now bring you the medical big lie, making the outlandish claim that Dr. Fauci was responsible for causing COVID-19. Using the select subcommittee as a platform for this disinformation, House Republicans now find themselves in the familiar position where their own investigation debunks their runaway political rhetoric. Just like the broader committee's impeachment drive proved only that there were no presidential crimes, much less high crimes and misdemeanors attributable to Joe Biden, the investigation of Dr. Fauci shows he is an honorable public servant who has devoted his entire career to the public health and the public interest, and he is not a comic book supervillain. He did not fund research to create the COVID-19 pandemic. He did not lie to Congress about gain-of-function research in Wuhan, and he did not organize a lab leak suppression campaign.
Jamie Raskin read all of that into the congressional record. So when someone looks back 50 years in the future, when they look back to this time, they will see the brave Jamie Raskin setting the record straight when it comes to Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's not telling the big lie. You are. They'll repeat that over and over and over and over again until it becomes common knowledge that what they're saying is simply the way it is. No one is going to contest it, at least, because they like the incentives from the regime, from the party of false decorum. They don't want to deal with the punishments. No one really wants to argue about COVID anymore. So this is now your historical record. Anthony Fauci is a hero, just trying to save American lives. In fact, that's what he's devoted his entire career to. Whereas Donald Trump is a convicted felon.
That is it inconceivable that anyone could get out of that I was covering anything up.
Would you have any reason to cover up any new scientific evidence relating to the origins of the COVID-19 virus?
Absolutely not. And that's the reason why it was important to get people together to discuss this in a transparent way.
Have you spent your whole life trying to determine the causes of infectious diseases and then to stop them to protect the American people?
Yes, I have.
Well, Dr. Fauci, I want to join my colleague from Florida in apologizing to you that some of our colleagues in the United States House of Representatives seem to want to drag your name through the mud. They're treating you, Dr. Fauci, like a convicted felon. Actually, you probably wish they were treating you like a convicted felon. They treat convicted felons with love and admiration. Some of them blindly worship convicted felons.
Now, Friar Cuck is playing his part well. I guess he has more hair now, so that might help. But he keeps looking down at his notes. Obviously, that entire exchange was set up. It was not good writing, very awkward, very clunky, but he did get himself around to that point where he gets to talk about a convicted felon. Oh, sorry, Dr. Fauci, you'd probably be treated better by my Republican colleagues if you were a convicted felon because they support a convicted felon. They're going to vote for a convicted felon. They even worship a convicted felon. Not like Jamie Raskin, who comes from a long line of people who worship the state. His dad, like him, was a prominent communist and a proud servant of the global regime. Marjorie Taylor Greene also played a starring role in the hearings today, as she did a few weeks ago with Jasmine Crockett and AOC. She repeatedly referred to Anthony Fauci as Mr. Fauci rather than Dr. Fauci, which is an obvious sign of intentional disrespect, and she copped to it when the quote-unquote other side tried to hold her quote-unquote accountable in the hearing. They wanted to use the congressional rules of decorum to force Marjorie Taylor Greene to call Anthony Fauci doctor. And as I said a couple weeks ago, I have no problem with Marjorie Taylor Greene breaking the rules of congressional decorum. The quote-unquote other side does not follow those rules of decorum themselves. All rules to them are disposable anytime they need to work outside of those rules. They know there's no one there to punish them and hold them to account. So they happily break the rules and then suggest that an exception had to be made in this particular case. The hearing, of course, was an embarrassment, but all of these hearings are an embarrassment. It's hard to take any of it seriously. A reporter caught up to MTG in the hallway, and it sounds like she's had enough of those Democrats.
No, absolutely not. I mean, everything I said is correct. It's how the American people feel. It's what we know to be a fact. It's all the evidence has been proven true. We have Jamie Raskin in there accusing us of worshiping Trump, worshiping as a convicted felon. She is a convicted well, yeah, so is George Floyd. And everybody, and you all too, the media worship George Floyd. Democrats worship George Floyd. There were riots burning down the fucking country over George Floyd, and Raskin is in there saying we worship him. Excuse me, let me correct you, and this is really important. I don't worship, I worship God. God. And Jesus is my savior. I don't worship President Trump. And I'm really sick and tired of the bullshit annex I have to deal with constantly from the Democrats. So that's what we just went through in there. And then they're sitting there, they can attack my character all day long. What's his face in there, whoever was talking last was calling me insane. But yet we can't say, oh, they're attacking my character. Oh no, it's nonstop BS and annex. You wanna know why? The Democrats don't have anything. They're responsible for the lockdowns, forced vaccinations, kids being forced to stay home, people committing suicide, and all the horrors that this country lived through during COVID. Fauci belongs in prison. He should be tried for mass murder, and he should be tried for crimes against humanity. That's how I feel after that hearing. That's how the American people feel.
Now, she laid it out pretty well there. That is how the American people feel, and the hope is, and I believe this to be true, that people have woken up enough to understand what's happening on their own. You would have to be pretty dense and pretty sold out by this point to listen to Jamie Raskin go through all of that and think, yeah, this guy sounds like he's telling the truth. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about. The anti-Fauci position is shared by virtually everyone who identifies as a Republican, probably most independents, and something in the ballpark of a third to a half of Democrats. Now, I don't have too many commies in my life these days, but it seems like they're holding on by a thread. They don't really support Biden. They don't really support the agenda. They don't really support Fauci. They just know that they have to express support for all of these things, and they believe that the other side is really terrible, so they're happy to continue doing it. But it's not like they're passionate about these positions. It's not like they're willing to stand and defend these characters. And you don't have to be a Trump supporter or a vaccine denier to be sick of Anthony Fauci or believe that he lied to the American public repeatedly. And even though we know that all of the levers of state power were employed to make sure that Anthony Fauci's word was taken as gospel, while tens of millions of people in our country worshiped the science as handed down from the authoritative source, you can't claim that he's repeating the big lie or that Raskin's repeating the big lie. Not when they've already claimed that about us. The big lie only works in one direction, and if you don't believe that, you're anti-Semitic. Or, I don't know, racist somehow. Or maybe you're transphobic. I mean, it's Pride Month. You could be transphobic. At the very minimum, you're a science denier and a climate denier and an election denier and a vaccine denier. And everybody knows that. And to make matters worse, now you worship a convicted felon. And hey, she sounds angry. And she accused Anthony Fauci of mass murder and crimes against humanity. And that's the sort of thing that would carry the death penalty, so therefore she's advocating for violence. Let's see what the perennially reelected Maxine Waters of South Los Angeles. No, I mean, she doesn't live there. She just presides over South Los Angeles while it continually falls apart for decades, while constantly being reelected and getting ever richer. I'm talking about Maxine Waters. She weighed in on the potential for civil war.
I am going to spend some time with the criminal justice system, with the justice system, asking them, tell us what's going on with the domestic terrorists. Are they preparing a civil war against us? Should we be concerned about our safety? What is he doing with this divisive language? It is dangerous, and we're going to have to make sure that we understand that we're not at risk with this man talking in the way that he's doing.
So it's civil war again. We're questioning the legitimacy of our institutions while our so-called allies on the Uniparty right are affirming the legitimacy of those institutions while suggesting that we use them to wage warfare through lawfare against our political opponents. And it's not just going to be about mislabeling a legal expense a legal expense. It's going to be about crimes against America, mass murder, crimes against humanity that carry the penalty of death, which means that I guess we're advocating violence because I guess we're the extremists of the Uniparty right. And they're saying that we should wage war through lawfare, prosecuting Democrats, and only Democrats, by the way, for grave crimes that carry through the legal system the penalty of death. So we are violent again. Here's Rand Paul, I guess, helping.
Your expectation is that President Trump could still win the election despite what has taken place. What is your reaction to the conviction and the guilty conviction?
a sad day in America, and what I worry about is something even bigger than Donald Trump. I worry about strife. I worry about war in the streets. I worry about 50% of the public believing that the court system will be used against them. Once upon a time it was because of the color of your skin, now because of the shade of your ideology. I worry about that, and I worry when half the country thinks they won't be treated fairly, what happens and how people react. If you look at records violations and you look at Hillary Clinton, $8 million expense, and they slapped her on the wrist because she got an $8,000 fine, and that's actually probably appropriate, some kind of fine for mislabeling things. But there's a real question whether it is mislabeled. Was it a legal expense? Sounds like it was a legal expense. All non-disclosure agreements, I believe, are legal expenses. I'm guessing there are hundreds of them in New York City as we speak, and my guess is not one of them have ever been taken to court. I think Donald Trump is the only person ever prosecuted for this particular crime.
Okay, so he's pointing out the two-tiered system of justice, but what is with that war in the streets part? What's going to happen when 50% of the country believes the courts will be used against them? What is he talking about? Why is Rand Paul suggesting that Trump supporters are going to be violent upon realizing that the courts will be used against us? Isn't Rand Paul supposed to be one of the good guys? What does he think has been happening these last 4 years? We've been censored. An election was stolen in broad daylight. We were accused of an insurrection over the staged enactment of the American Reichstag fire. Parents were called domestic terrorists for going to school board meetings, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, if he's just playing his part in this ongoing info op, if he's just relaying the proper parts of the narrative, fine. But he failed to object to the certification of those obviously fraudulent electors on January 6th, 2021. You're welcome to consider him an ally. I don't. I actually find it pretty worrying that he's playing into the rhetoric of the global regime by suggesting the potential for war in the streets after Trump's supporters, more than 50% of the country, realize that the system might be working against them. Hey, Rand, everybody knows that. Maybe the situation would be a little less tense if people like you were actually attempting to hold people accountable and speaking out against, for instance, stolen elections, rather than simply performing limited hangouts when it comes to Anthony Fauci and COVID months or years after the points you're making stop mattering in the decision-making process of the people you're meant to be representing. Why is the Libertarian Republican senator from Kentucky suggesting that the supporters of the presidential nominee of his party will resort to war in the streets upon finding out that the system isn't serving them? And while it should be obvious, it is worth repeating, there's absolutely no evidence of anything like that even being possible. Now, people on our side will comment on the false flag aspects of the very violent insurrection. We will discuss the presence of various agents and assets. We will discuss the agents provocateurs. We'll discuss the film crews invited to document the event, including the one run by Nancy Pelosi's daughter. We'll discuss the pipe bomb hoax. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone on our side suggest that political violence is a good thing. And that's not what's being defended in any of the critiques I've heard of the very violent insurrection narrative. Trump supporters aren't the violent ones. Trump supporters aren't the people advocating for violence in the streets, nor are they the ones defending it. And when we know the other side is attempting to manufacture a civil war, or at least a civil war narrative, you have to wonder why our supposed allies like Rand Paul are helping them do it, particularly when it is legitimately the other side that has always been the source of political violence in our country and in the world in general. Political violence is part of the color revolution strategy. It is part of the collectivist strategy. It's deployed by the regime in all of their revolutionary movements. It was deployed by Bolsheviks, by Nazis, by communists always. In Ukraine, of course. In the Middle East, of course. In South America, of course. But proactive political violence is not the strategy of normal patriotic Americans. Here's a reminder of how the regime responded to political violence in our recent past.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized right up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
And that ended with the video footage of the Trump supporter in the white truck driving through Portland during the Summer of Love and being shot for being a Trump supporter. Here's Bill Maher on Friday night talking to former Obama campaign manager David Axelrod, predicting what will happen if Judge Juan Merchan sentences Donald Trump to prison.
I would really be shocked if this judge gave him a prison sentence for this.
I mean, MAGA Nation will go nuts. I don't know if that's a reason to or not to do something, but they will.
Yeah, but one of the things about this apocalyptic language that you hear from all of these, the Amen chorus, is they really are inviting violence, and that's a big concern of mine. And Trump is completely unrestrained in suggesting that maybe that's appropriate. I mean, he hints that all the time. That's how he got in trouble on January 6th, and he's doing it again because I think he's more desperate now than he was then.
But if they put him in jail, I know it'll happen because the judge's name was Juan.
Yes.
Everything becomes racial in this country. You know, that's partly because of our horrible, despicable racial past, partly because some of that racism lives on in the president, and some of it because the far left makes everything racial. But that's what it's going to be.
So if Judge Juan Merchan sentences Trump to prison, MAGA Nation is going to go nuts and start a race war because Merchan's name is Juan. That's what it's going to be, because the far left makes everything racial, and therefore MAGA extremists are going to make it racial because Juan Merchan's name is Juan? Hey, Bill, you're the far left making everything racial. You want to find some way to tie this potential dark fantasy you have about street violence caused by MAGA supporters. You want to tie that to the Civil War and all the historical revisions that have settled into the collective consciousness as truth. You want to tie that all together so you can claim the actual street violence and the invitation to foreign fighters and foreign nations to fight will all be made acceptable because of the need to stamp out a race war, all caused by the man being named Juan. I wonder who all the Trump supporters named Juan will side with. Will they realize that Trump supporters have been racist against them the entire time? They know that Donald Trump's support is not going anywhere. They know Trump's not going anywhere. They know that Trump is more popular than he's ever been. They thought they could shame people by calling Trump a convicted felon, but that isn't going to work. They're going to have to figure out a way to either cancel the elections entirely or prepare for Donald Trump being the reported winner. Now, I've said plenty of times, this is the scenario I see happening. They're going to call Trump the winner, steal all those races for the Uniparty, not necessarily for Democrats, down ballot at the local level. They'll have an entire army of illegitimate officials to subvert Trump's agenda, the American people's agenda, at every possible turn while keeping the election fraud apparatus in place. And then they begin to execute all the narrative deployments that all this stuff is leading up to. They're going to bring the Civil War, World War I, and World War II together. And just as they have revised all of those histories, they will be revising the present we exist in right now as it is told to people in the future, so that we will be the bad guys, not them, us, not the Uniparty that's done all this, and not the Uniparty supporters that have supported them doing all this, us. We will be the bad guys. And to be clear, I am not simply saying that they will turn it around, like in history, that the Nazis were actually the good guys. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that controlled opposition dynamics existed then just as they exist now. They existed in the Civil War just as they exist now. In every scenario, it's the regime against the people. The regime maintaining control over all the lands they want to control, so they have access to all the resources and can make those resources scarce and valuable. And they want to make sure that no one ever leaves their financial system, especially not the wealthiest and most powerful country in the history of the world. The political solutions have not worked and will not work. And unless they're able to find some sort of scare event to get everybody back on the same page, which I think is extremely unlikely, well, then they need war in this country. And they can't just have the UN peacekeeping forces or NATO invade, or their partners in this or that regime-controlled nation invade. It can't just be the Mexican cartels or an army of illegal aliens, because Americans would unite together to fight that off. They need to maintain the division and push the framing of a civil war so that they can bring outside resources and armies in to fight alongside the Uniparty and its supporters in America. And they will claim patriotism while they do it. That's what's being set up. We don't just need to look at what's happening now through the eyes of history as we were taught it. We need to go back to that history, viewing it through the lens of what we're witnessing now. We have to see that they have used these exact narratives before. In fact, they use them over and over and over again. And as I've said many times, they move them around the world to different locations. Slight variations depending on the culture and the situation on the ground. They use different stories at different times, but the song remains the same. Because if we can't escape the controlled opposition dynamic, if everyone believes that's what the real sides are, and people line up behind those sides, then they're already back in control of everything. We're going to line up alongside the Uniparty right in a war not of our own choosing, where the outcome is already determined and the target has always been us? That's the scenario that must be avoided at all costs. And that is what is being promoted by the Uniparty left, with the Uniparty right as a willing participant in the narrative deployment. The way out of this is to make it clear not only to one another, but to people who have traditionally supported the Uniparty left, that we are not the other side. We are the opt-out position from both sides of the controlled opposition dynamic. Our message may not always sound unifying, at least to the extent that it is not compromising. It's not conciliatory, but our ideology is, and our agenda is, because people know instinctively that everything within that controlled opposition dynamic is broken, and it has been for their entire lives, for our entire lives. How many decades have you heard people discuss how the parties are essentially the same and the candidates are the same, and it's a choice between the lesser of two evils? That's because there's never been a true way to opt out. We talked last week about the Libertarian Party and about third parties in general. They've never actually presented an opt-out from that controlled opposition dynamic. They're just a more niche brand of the same thing. People are looking to opt out, and that is what we have to offer them. But that's impossible when we continue to allow ourselves to be trapped in that controlled opposition dynamic, pushing the same ideas on people looking to opt out that Con Inc. is pushing on us. We're trying to stand in strong support of American ideals so that people can unify around ideals. We're not trying to convince the Uniparty left that Ben Shapiro really is better than Rachel Maddow. So why are we always supporting the arguments of those people when it is their goal and their role to prevent people from opting out? That's why they get paid the big money to be wrong all the time. Being wrong doesn't matter to their audience because they're the right brand of wrong, and wrong is the only thing on offer. That's why we have to opt out. Now, you might hear this and respond, okay, I see where you're coming from. But Donald Trump himself said it was a dark day. Steve Bannon suggested that Republicans pursue a lawfare strategy directed at Democrats. Trump has often asserted that Democrats need to be careful what they wish for. Aren't they advising the very thing you're advising against? Well, let's see how hard they pursue these strategies. Did they just voice their approval of those strategies, or are they going to push for those strategies on a regular basis in the weeks and months to come? And I think it's the former. I wrote this yesterday on Telegram and Truth Social. The response strategy is to incorporate the usable and or necessary parts of the controlled opposition dynamic, to present the alternative outside of the controlled opposition dynamic, and then to emphasize the truth of the alternative and the insufficiency of the controlled opposition in explaining what's happening or what must be done. And this isn't new. This is one of the major dynamics that was in play throughout the Ron DeSantis op. A controlled opposition dynamic is set up, and then members of Uniparty media on either side will present the options. Supporters of the Uniparty on either side will then let everyone know about their emotional response to those options. And then there's enormous pressure to opt in on one of those options, even for people who want to opt out completely. Now, what would happen if Donald Trump immediately opted out in every situation? The Uniparty left would call him, and by virtue of that, us, stupid, dangerous. They'd call us conspiracy theorists and extremists, and the Uniparty right would join them in that. In fact, they'd even accuse us of siding with the Uniparty left so that anyone who does not want to be identified with the Uniparty left will then disavow the MAGA position. We saw this on the abortion issue. We saw this at the beginning of the year on the immigration issue, when they were seeking approval for Mike Johnson's package when the immigration element was still in there, and Donald Trump was saying this isn't a good deal. They started blaming Donald Trump for the immigration problem and claiming that somehow it was Trump supporters who were in favor of open borders. These strategies used against outsiders have always been successful because both sides of the controlled opposition dynamic will come together against any force or narrative that might convince people to opt out. And so what do you do in that case? You accept one of the options within the controlled opposition dynamic and then propose that while that solution is all right, what we really need is something well beyond that, something much better than that. And that solution will incorporate the opt-out position. Sure, we need to prosecute all of those people who have committed crimes against the country and crimes against humanity, but who are we going to trust to do that? We can't trust people who are only in power due to the outcomes of rigged and stolen elections. We can't trust them to prosecute the Uniparty when they're beneficiaries of the Uniparty. We can't just go around empowering our enemies because we were swayed by the power of some emotionally manipulative solution proposed by our favorite television character. The strategy is to select from the options within the controlled opposition dynamic in order to inoculate ourselves against the attacks from both sides and then move toward the opt-out position. And that is what we see Donald Trump doing over and over and over again. And people like Steve Bannon will do the same thing. And it's going to continue happening until people, by and large, are prepared to opt out of the central narrative completely. And if we don't do that, we're just going to get the hose again. This will continue happening until that shock therapy really takes. Now, you might think this sounds a little doomy. I don't mean to sound doomy, and I certainly am not doomy, but I could understand why this sounds rather daunting at least. But the thing is, we're not at the beginning stages of this project. We're near the end stages. There are still attacks to come. There are still threats around. But we've gotten pretty good at anticipating them and responding to them and preparing for them. I put up a poll this weekend, and I said kind of jokingly, on a scale from 1 to extremely victorious, how do you feel after this post-verdict weekend? 10% of people were at a 1. I guess they're very sad and broken up about the verdict. 82% said extremely victorious. But 8% chose the third option, that they weren't as ready as they thought they were. And I think it's a good thing that people can recognize that. You feel the shock, you have your reaction, and then you take inventory of that reaction. And if you were thrown off, if you weren't as prepared as you thought you were, maybe there are areas in your life where your preparation can be improved. Maybe you were lacking information that could have made you feel otherwise. Maybe your faith has hit some sort of lull and you need to address that. Maybe you're more concerned about physical violence in the streets after a weekend of that psyop. Maybe you're worried about shortages or whatever else. However you need to better prepare yourself, focus on doing that rather than worrying about the future. Because again, we're not at the beginning of that process. We're much closer to the end of that process. And if we can successfully navigate the rest of these threats that the narratives are going to present, they are telling us this is what's coming. They are showing us this is what's coming. We shouldn't pretend it's not coming. If you want to avoid these possibilities, then you prepare for the possibilities and you discuss the possibilities. You don't allow the TV characters to shape and in many ways create our future. We don't want the future they've prepared. And the truth is, basically no one wants the future they've prepared, at least once they understand what that future is. And if both sides of the controlled opposition are telling them that future is their only option and all they can do is choose which brand of that option they prefer, then what we need to do is make it clear that none of those options are acceptable. We're not going to line up behind the Uniparty right because we know for certain that we're headed for civil war and they seem like our best allies. We're going to show everyone that there is an opt-out and then allow everyone to join us. And that's what they're doing. This is the true magnificence of what has been accomplished by Donald Trump. The opt-out position is now the majority position, and it will only grow as time marches on. This is what people like Matt Walsh don't understand when they're trying to sound all tough to attract those Trump supporters. No one believes he's actually tough. No one believes the Republican establishment is tough. All of these people have already proven that they are not on the side of the American people and are not prepared to fight for the American people. What do we need Matt Walsh for when we've got Donald Trump and we've got the American people? That's what the movement is about. That's what it's built. We don't need to grovel on our knees before Con Inc. We don't need these people's help. They're not our allies. They're just looking now to ride Trump's coattails so that they can remain in some position of power and influence to be part of the subversion and then attempt to clean up whatever scraps exist when Trump is gone. And you know how I know we don't need these people at all? Because of how the rest of the weekend went. On Saturday afternoon, Donald Trump announced that he would be attending the UFC fights that evening in New Jersey. Of course, he went as a special guest of Dana White, and the two made an enormous entrance into the arena on Saturday night.
With Conor McGregor also making his way to the octagon, the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, flanked by UFC CEO Dana White. Lost in the pageantry is just how big a mixed martial arts fan Donald Trump is. He sits octagon side with the cans on, absolutely loves our live events, and a real privilege to have President Trump in the building at UFC 299.
So Donald Trump walks in to an arena filled with 17,000 screaming fight fans, as well as a number of big-name celebrities. And he is absolutely loved. This is how the arena sounded during one of the fights. The crowd is chanting, "We want Trump." There were also F Joe Biden chants throughout the night. This is during the fights. And then, of course, when it comes to pop culture, no one has been more supportive of Donald Trump than the UFC fighters, and it just continues to grow and become more obvious every time he attends one of the fights. This is Sean Strickland after his win.
Thank you, Rogan. Hey, President Trump, you're the man, bro. It is a damn travesty what they're doing to you. I'll be donating to you, my man. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. Congratulations, sir. Sean Strickland, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a damn shame what they're doing to you. I'll be donating to you. Let's get it done. And Joe Rogan repeats, let's get it done. And the 17,000 people in the building are nice, but there are hundreds of thousands, millions watching at home. And they're not all Donald Trump fans. They're not all MAGA supporters. They're not even all UFC fans. A lot of people are just kind of along for the ride while other people are watching UFC. And this is what is coming through their television.
And close on the distance and a few capoeira kicks perhaps tonight.
I think there's just a freeness about that, right? That dancing, breaking, and when you can incorporate that into your fighting style, it makes you so difficult to prepare for.
So you're watching MSNBC and CNN and Fox News, and they're all reviewing their emotions, telling you how they feel about how Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. People telling us how it's their final straw. National Review's Dan McLaughlin wrote an editorial for the Daily Mail, headlined, "I'm a lifelong Republican, outraged by this sham verdict, but I still won't vote for Trump." And all of that is just so weak and so whiny and so stupid. And then you get together with some friends and you crack a beer so you can all watch UFC together. And you're subjected to a massive Trump love fest right when you are supposed to be spiking the football. I mean, this was the silver bullet. They finally got Trump. The only thing better than this is locking him away in prison and throwing away the key for all of those. It's hard to call them crimes, especially when none of these people can describe what he did. But hey, they've been pushing this for years. They've been pining away for this for years, and they finally got him. And then they got that. They had about 48 hours to pretend that all of this was very legitimate and very important. Trump is a convicted felon now, except no one's really buying it. And it took less than 2 days for it to be proven to virtually everyone that calling Trump a convicted felon is an embarrassing position to take. In fact, we're basically at the point where taking that position, the position people for years have taken to receive social credit, well, now it's going to diminish their social credit, their reputation, their social standing. It is becoming unseemly, maybe even offensive, to be supporting the regime over Donald Trump at this point. But such is life in the party of false decorum, because the elites need Donald Trump out, which means their media has to create narratives that suggest Donald Trump must be taken out. Because if they're not able to do that and they can't get the Civil War, then they are all under grave existential threat. And why is that? Well, here's Fox News yesterday. I'll let the convicted felon tell you why.
To declassify things that everyone's talking about. I know you talked earlier about it. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. So if you were president, would you declassify, you can answer yes or no to these. Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah. I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
You want to get out of uniparty control? You want to opt out of the controlled opposition dynamic? There's your alternative. We don't need illegitimate officials practicing lawfare, and we sure as hell don't need civil war. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!